Oh, not yet. Good evening. I'm Steve Monk for Stand Up Minnesota, and this is our series of Facebook Live town halls with the candidate from the DFL for nomination for the governor of Minnesota. Today we are joined by Tina Liebling, member of the Minnesota House of Representatives for District 26A, which includes Rochester and Olmsted County. Born in Minneapolis, Tina has both a master's degree in public health and a law degree. She has been a representative since 2005, the first person from Olmsted County elected to the legislature from the DFL. For the next hour, Tina will be taking your questions. Just type in the question into the feed. We will get as many as we can. Please welcome Tina Liebling.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for helping out. Thank you to Stand Up Minnesota for having this Facebook town hall. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to folks through Facebook. And I am Tina Liebling, state representative from Rochester. And as Steve just read in my introduction there, in fact, I am the first DFLer from Olmsted County ever to be elected to the state legislature. So it was at least 30 years before my election since we'd had even a progressive person elected, and at that time people didn't run with a partisan label. So that's how I can safely say I'm the first DFLer elected from Olmsted County. So I did turn a red district to blue back when I was elected in 2004, but that wasn't the first time I ran. I ran in 2002. I am as Steve read, I have a law degree. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I was practicing criminal defense law here in Rochester in 2002 when I was recruited to run as a candidate for the first time. And that happened to be the year that Senator Paul Wellstone was running what turned out to be his last race. Of course, we didn't know it at the time. That was the year his plane really tragically crashed. But I had the opportunity to run when Paul Wellstone was running, and I got to observe him close up. He always talked about how the people who had the lobbyists and the lawyers at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. didn't need his representation. He was there for everybody else. And that really was inspiring to me, and I really wanted to follow in his footsteps. The second piece is that he had extraordinary political courage. He was the only senator running for re-election that year who voted against the Iraq War. And he did not know whether his constituents would understand. Now we kind of think of that as a no-brainer vote, but it was a risky vote at the time. That was the vote he took. So he's kind of my political model. So I ran that year. It was a terrible year for Democrats. His plane crashed. We were devastated, and I lost that year. But there's a hashtag, nevertheless, she persisted, and I decided to run again because I felt so strongly about Paul Wellstone's legacy that I decided to try it again, and I was elected. I turned the red district to blue, and then I've been reelected 6 more times. So I'm in my 7th term in the Minnesota House. And what I think is maybe a little different about me than from some people who flipped a district from red to blue is that I always have run as a bold progressive. When you get elected to the Minnesota House and you're from a district that flips, people try to tell you to be careful, be a moderate. I could never be a moderate. I always had progressive values. I always believed that ordinary people need advantages to get ahead. I've always been opposed to the corporate, what I would call the kleptocracy, people that, the corporate, the 1% just taking and taking and taking. And so that's been the way I've conducted my political career. Never thought about running for higher office until 2016, just like many of you that are watching this feed, that when the election happened, it woke up a lot of people. And a lot of us felt like we have to do something more. We can't just let our country go down the drain. We could either sort of hide under the table and hope that some leaders emerge that would fix it for us, or we could get out there and be the leaders that we were looking for. And so I decided that we needed a progressive candidate. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016. I supported Bernie Sanders because I thought he was addressing the issues that really mattered to people, talking about the economy, talking about how people work 2 and 3 jobs just to stay even. Had some really bold ideas, was for single-payer health care, which is something I've been for many, many years. So after that election, I was looking for a progressive candidate in the order of Bernie Sanders to run for Minnesota governor, because I believed that that was what we needed in order to win. Somebody who was bold and was speaking to the issues, and somebody who would get into office and continue to be bold, because watching Governor Dayton in office, it is not a place that you can, you need to have a backbone. There's tremendous pressure on the governor. So those were the things I was looking for. I looked around, I couldn't find anyone else to run, and I decided I should take the advice I've been giving to women for many years about stop giving yourself excuses, be the leader that you want to see. So I decided to launch my campaign for governor. So I'm going to stop there. I want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions. I'm glad you've joined us, and thank you again to Steve for helping out tonight, and I'm anxious to hear from you.
Okay, our first question is from Sarah Henderson. Now that CHIP funding has expired and been not renewed by Congress, what might you promote for children's health care?
That's a great question. I and a lot of other people are hoping that the CHIP funding, this is the Children's Health Insurance Program. It's a program that the federal government's been funding for all the states for many years, that's targeted to children so that children have insurance. This was predated the Affordable Care Act. And we're hoping that they're going to re-up with this insurance. In Minnesota, we've used this money a little differently from other states because we have our special Minnesota Care program that started out being a state-funded program long ago. It's kind of a special insurance for low-income working people where they pay a small premium, and it's really very good insurance for people who have too much money for Medicaid. But I absolutely agree that we need to make sure that children are covered. In fact, I'm a strong supporter of single-payer health care, or Medicare for all, if you want to call it that. And certainly, we cannot allow our children to go uninsured. So we'll have to see, in terms of specifics, a lot is going to depend on what we have available to us after the next election. We just don't know if CHIP will have been restored, if the federal government is going to, completely repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would be an economic disaster for Minnesota. But I think that we have to make sure that our children get their health care. They are our future. So I don't have a specific, except that, well, let me say this. One of the things I think we need to do to move towards single-payer health care, even if the federal government won't give us all the flexibility or all the money we might need to do that, is kind of take a smaller slice of the population or a smaller slice of healthcare and try to design our own single-payer program for that smaller scale, sort of a proof of concept, so that we can show Minnesotans that we can do this and do it well. And one place to do that might be children, because, for a lot of reasons. One being just that, it would be, I think, easy to convince Minnesotans that children deserve to have health care. Thank you for the question.
Okay, now for our next one. Candy Hazen asks, does you support Medicare for all? Tina?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Candy. And absolutely, I do. I've been a supporter for many, many years, and belonged to various organizations that were promoting single-payer health care. And this is one of the reasons I supported Bernie Sanders. I was very frustrated that at that time that Hillary Clinton felt that we'd had enough, I think she called it divisive conversation about health care, and she was ready to kind of not push on. And in the legislature, we've been pushing on. We've been having that conversation constantly. It never went away. And the Affordable Care Act, while it did a lot of good, we were grateful that we were able to expand Medicaid and cover more people and all of that, and have certainly get rid of the limitations for people with pre-existing conditions. That was all better. But it's still an insurance-based system. It's never really going to get us where we need to go. And when I talk to people now, people who have insurance through their employers, the costs are going up, the out-of-pockets are tremendous. People are really struggling about how to get health care that they need and how to afford it. I really think that a Medicare for all system, if that's what you want to call it, or single payer, that's the only way to go. So we need to move that way as quickly as we can.
Okay. Oh, that's a hard name. Sarah Grentoff asked, how do you balance the interest of the environmentalist and the needs of our workers in northern Minnesota?
Right, that's a question. Thank you for that question. It's one that's been brought up a lot about, this is coming up around the issue of copper sulfide mining in northern Minnesota. And there are two proposed mines, one of them in the watershed for the Boundary Canoe area, and one of them in the watershed for Duluth and Lake Superior. So we've got two things going on here. I firmly believe that the way to move forward is not just simply to trust corporations who want to make a profit and turn our future over to them. I'm really very, very skeptical that those mines can be done safely. At the same time, when we talk about balancing needs, we have to recognize the real desire of people to be able to have a job that is a family-sustaining job with some security, that gives people dignity and a way forward. And people don't have that. And that's a lot of the energy around wanting the copper sulfide mining, is because these corporations are kind of dangling these jobs out there and saying, look, we've got these jobs for you and you'll be better off and so on. But I think we have to be very skeptical about those claims. A lot of what I've heard is that there will be many fewer jobs than they're promising. And these are multinational corporations. There's no guarantee these would even be union jobs or that they would be family-sustaining jobs. So I'm very skeptical of that. I think we have to take people's desire to have decent work very seriously. That's something that we all want. And unfortunately, there's less and less of it, not only on the Iron Range, but all over the state, all over our country, as corporations are taking more and more and jobs don't keep up with inflation. I talk to people all over who really feel desperate about ever having the kind of opportunity their parents had. And that's something that we have to take very seriously, and one of the very reasons I'm running for office.
Okay. Laura East asks, I would like to know that what Tina will do more for transportation and infrastructure for the statewide.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Laura, for that question. Transportation infrastructure statewide. So one of the things that the Republicans have done is pit us against each other and give us the idea that if we are building roads and bridges in greater Minnesota, that we can't also have transit in the metro area. And I think this is a very false kind of division. In fact, we can't afford as a state not to have a decent transportation system everywhere. Transportation underlies our whole economy. And everyone knows this if they think about it. I'm not saying anything people don't know. If you can't get to your job, you can't have a job. If an employer can't get workers to come to their place of employment, they can't have a business. If people are, say, on farms and they can't move their product to market because they don't have decent roads, then they're not going to be able to have their farm for very long. So this is all important for all of us. I think that we should not force the metro area to fund its own transportation system. This has gotten more and more. People are asked to pay local taxes to fund their own local system. And I think that we have to recognize that we're all in this together. I talk to people all the time who've moved from greater Minnesota to metro area and back again, or the other way around. We're all in this together. And the metro area fuels a lot of the economy of this state. And in fact, the money flow tends to go from the metro area to greater Minnesota. So we have to make sure that we recognize the needs all over the state. We need to fund that appropriately. We shouldn't pit those needs against the needs of our schools and healthcare and things like that, which the Republicans did in the last legislative session. We need to raise money appropriately. I do think that we need to look at a gas tax. I also think we need to ask truckers to pay more money for the roads that they use, because they do a lot of wear and tear on the roads. Certainly where people pay, at the fare box when they use transportation. But we ought to find ways to raise money across the state, because even if I don't ever get on a bus, The fact that those buses are there is helping me as well as the people who are riding them.
Okay, good. And for our next one. I sort of scrolled off the screen there. I can't quite get the whole question.
Hold on.
We're working on it.
This will come in multiple parts.
There we go. Okay, this is from Sabrina Mauritz. Hope I got that right. She asks, our home care system in Minnesota is in a shambles. As caregivers, we're saying in the profession, unaffordable. There's more to it. Seems a little disjointed. In 2014, you voted against the right of home care workers to unionize during one of the most critical moments for people working to solve this crisis.
Okay, great. I'm glad you asked the question. Thank you very much. So I've always supported putting more money in the legislature into raising the salaries of people who are doing home care. This has reached a crisis. But you asked about that specific vote, and I'm really glad you did, because there's been some misinformation spread about that. The attempt to unionize home care workers, I supported that 100% from the beginning. The problem is that that bill was combined with another bill which I did not support. And so it was one of those things where you had to either, vote against something you supported or vote for something that you didn't support. So I don't know if you want me to totally go into why I didn't support the other piece. The other piece was an attempt by a different union to organize daycare workers who are small businesses. And if I had been one of those small business home care businesses, I would have wanted to join a union. But what they were bargaining over, what they wanted authority to bargain over, was not their own conditions of employment and wages. They wanted to be able to bargain over a benefit that the state gives to parents. So our child care assistance program is a state benefit that goes to the parents of low-income parents who need help with child care. They wanted to organize to have permission to have a union bargain over that benefit. So this to me was not something that was appropriate. This is very much like having construction workers be able to bargain over whether the state has a bonding bill or something like that. This is something that elected officials should be deciding, not something that a union should be bargaining over. But I 100% believe in the right of people to organize, to bargain over their own wages and conditions of employment. That's, I think, a sacred right. I think it's absolutely built our country. So that was a very tough vote. My vote was not the deciding vote. The healthcare workers went on to organize. I'm glad they did. I support their contracts. And I fought off attempts to demonize them and all of that stuff. But the other piece of it that passed also, AFSCME lost the vote to organize those workers, and I think that in the meantime also courts have weighed in and said that what they were trying to do, in fact, I might be not entirely clear on this, but it's something that hasn't gone well. So I still think it was the right vote. I'm glad that the home care workers were able to organize. We do have shortages in that area. We have shortages in just about every area of employment in this state. If you talk to teachers, if you talk to people who take care of folks with disabilities, just about every sector of our economy we have these problems. But I absolutely agree that home care workers, people who take care of those with disabilities, need to make a living wage just like everybody else, because it's very hard work, it's honorable work, and the people who do that work absolutely need to be able to have a decent lifestyle just like everybody else. So thanks again for that question.
Okay. Mary Chasson asks, I'm interested how she would bridge the urban area and the greater Minnesota needs. So.
Right. This is something that's come up a lot in this campaign because people have the sense after the 2016 election that we're almost like different countries, that greater Minnesota is different than metro Minnesota. And of course, I'm from Rochester, which is greater Minnesota, but it certainly is not rural. My district is, it's more like a suburban, some of it's a little more like urban, some of it's more like suburban district. And my district is 40% Republican, by the way, still, even after I've represented it all these years. So I think that one thing we must do is be speaking to Minnesotans about what's going on in the economy and what's going on in their lives. And from being everywhere that I've been, I firmly believe that people in greater Minnesota have a lot of the same concerns that people in the more populated areas have. Everybody needs clean water. Everybody needs a decent education. Everybody needs health care. Everybody needs economic opportunity. So there are different flavors of this in different places. But there are lots of ways, the things that we need, we all need. So for example, one thing we all need, fast, reliable internet access. And in greater Minnesota, the shortages or the absence of that is acute in a lot of places. But believe it or not, here in Rochester, we have a problem with that too. So we need to really address these needs so that people can live in the state anywhere they want to and have the same basic needs met. I think that when we talk about those basic needs, when we talk about ordinary people trying to get by, we are talking to people both in the metro and in greater Minnesota or rural Minnesota. What we shouldn't do is think that people in rural areas are all one thing. So when we talk about farmers, you have a lot of different kinds of farming and a lot of different farmers. You've got the farmer who's a corporate farmer and has lots of acreage and is trying to do things, grow acre after acre of corn. Or you have somebody who's young who's trying to get some land to start some sheep farming, like a young woman that I met in greater Minnesota and is struggling to get land. So we shouldn't think that people are all one thing. We shouldn't think that we shouldn't buy into the argument that there's a big division there. Now, that said, the way Democrats are going to win is not in the far rural counties. It would be good if we didn't lose as badly there. But in order to win statewide, we have to energize our base. We have to be speaking to the people who do live in the populated areas as well as in the less populated areas. So we should never pretend to be Republican light. We should never listen to the Trump voters and say, oh, how can we appeal to the Trump voter? I think we have to appeal to people who don't even know why they should vote because ordinary politicians are not speaking to them, don't seem to care, don't seem to understand that wages aren't growing, don't seem to understand that their kids can't get a good education. So that's what we need to be focusing on.
Good. We have our next question. Okay, Cindy Olson asks, what is your position on gun control legislation, especially the move for concealed carry reciprocity?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Cindy. I am very strongly a supporter of gun safety legislation. Now, there are different ways to get at this. I think the low-hanging fruit on this is to have universal background checks in the state. This is something we can do. And the reason we haven't been able to do it is because of the gun lobby's influence over a lot of legislators. And this is something we absolutely have to push back on. In terms of that reciprocity legislation, that scares me because we should have stronger legislation in Minnesota about who gets to carry a gun. And when we think about places that have basically nothing at all being able to, and are having the federal government telling us that we have to recognize their right to come into our state and carry a gun if they are not qualified to do it even in Minnesota under our pretty weak laws now, that really scares me. So that's going on in Congress. I think we should all make our voices heard and absolutely flat out oppose that. And Republicans who like to talk about states' rights, that means the states should be able to do it when they like what the states are doing. And when they don't like what the states are doing, then they want Congress, namely a Congress that Republicans are in charge of, to come in and tell the states what they have to do. We really have to fight this. You know, we're not doing well in this country with gun violence. We've got far too many guns on the street, and I think it's pretty clear from the evidence that it's because we have so many guns out there that we have a lot of the problems that we do. So we need to do whatever we can to tighten down on that and make sure that, you know, hunting, sure, I'm not telling anybody they can't hunt, and I'm not telling anybody they can't have a gun in their house for protection if they feel like they've got to have that, as long as it's kept away from children and stuff like that. But we've got a serious problem, and you better believe it. If strong legislation came to my desk, I would sign it.
Okay. Mary Kirschling asks, what kind of industry jobs do you see as possible for our rural areas, and how government support and promote those jobs?
Right, great question. So, Mary, one of the things we've got to have, and I mentioned it before briefly, is broadband all over the state. And Democrats have tried to do this a little bit. There have been some reports and things about the need for this. It is expensive, and we have put some money toward this to try to expand broadband. And the reason I'm talking about this is because if people want to start businesses, small businesses, in a lot of the more rural areas, they really can't because they just don't have the broadband available there to be able to do it. So if you want to be a graphic designer and a lot of your work is sent over the internet, you've got to have good internet access. Here's where I'm a little bit different on that than some of the candidates. If the state is going to put money into something like that, and it is expensive, I don't want us to hand our money over to corporations and say, here, please do something nice that's going to help us. Here's our money. I think we should if we're going to spend public money, we ought to use it to build public infrastructure. There's been some talk about that here in Rochester, but I think the state could be a lot more helpful both with technical support and with financing to help local governments do this so that they own it, so that they control it. And then if they want to lease it to some of these big corporations, they do it on our terms, on their terms. And that's how we can get around this problem with net neutrality going away as well. So that would really boost employment in rural areas. Other kinds of things. I think that there's a big move now. There's a local foods movement. There are a lot of kinds of ways that people are starting to use agricultural products differently. Frankly, I am a big proponent of removing the prohibition on cannabis. And if you think about it, cannabis is an industry that would be in agricultural areas. People could be growing cannabis. That would be, and they are now for our medical cannabis, but it's really on a pretty small scale. So there's another product. Industrial hemp is another product. That's kind of gotten a little bit of a start now, but industrial hemp is another something that people can grow in rural areas. So there are lots of things. I think in Minnesota we're very blessed to have a pretty diversified economy, and I think that what we need to do is help our rural areas also be diversified. The more diversified we can be, the more we're kind of buffered against shocks of the economy going up and down. And the more small businesses we have, the more opportunity we have for individuals to kind of control their own destiny, and we can harness the creativity and energy of lots of Minnesotans from different backgrounds. And that's really what I like to see. If the state is going to invest in jobs, I want to invest in the small people. I don't want to hand money to corporations and say, here, create some jobs. I think we can do better than that.
Okay. Beth Ann Bloom asks, are you electable? Do you have a message that will catch fire and bring Minnesotans to the polls to vote for you?
Well, that's a great question. I certainly hope so, because I think Bernie Sanders had a message that brought people to the polls, and I'm in this race because somebody needs to be talking the way that Bernie Sanders talks, talking about the ordinary person, talking about taking our country, our state, back from the corporate, the one percenters who've been taking more and more of our economy over the years. So I think that is the message that will resonate with Minnesotans. I think that's a message that even cuts across party lines, to tell you the truth. I think we're getting to the point where, you know, a lot of people don't vote for Democrats just because they're Democrats. And I think that the message of look how bad the Republicans are is not going to get us very far, as we saw in the last election, even though I certainly think that, people should look at what is happening in Congress and understand how bad they really are. But we need to present a hopeful vision for the future for Minnesota, and I think that we can do a lot here. That's why the slogan of my campaign is Believe in Minnesota, because Minnesota is a very special place. Minnesotans really believe that we can do things together. This is the state of Paul Wellstone. We all do better when we all do better. And I think that does resonate with people. And when they believe that we're for them, if we are with them and not with the corporate 1%ers, not with the Amazons who want to come in and, dangle 50,000 jobs and say, give us whatever we want. If we're for the actual people that are struggling to get by, and we have plans like single-payer health care, like free tuition for 2 years at our state colleges, at our public colleges, I think people will be with us. So I do think I'm electable.
I think so too. Okay. Okay, Ellie Krentz asks, what would you do to improve the racial disparities that exist in Minnesota?
Alabama, I think. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Let's split up. Okay, sorry. Alabama elections results really has him thinking about this and how we can close the gaps here. So.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, Ellie. Thank you very much, about closing racial disparities that exist in Minnesota. Minnesotans should hang our heads in shame over this. We are so bad for a state that we value. We think of ourselves as so progressive and so far ahead, and we are in so many things. And yet in racial disparities, we are absolutely dragging the bottom of the barrel. And this is a problem that it's not only bad because it's just immoral that there's such disparity, but also it's going to drag all of us down. It is dragging all of us down because now more than ever we've got changing demographics, we've got a need for more workers in the state, for people who are prepared to take different kinds of jobs, who are creative, who have energy. And more of our young people are people of color. And so if we are not absolutely empowering and getting everybody in the state working at their highest and best capacity, we are in a world of trouble. So the answers, of course, are a lot more difficult than describing the problem. But I think there are a number of ways we can do it. First of all, I want to say that as a white person, I don't think that I should come in and lay solutions on people. What I want to do is bring people in to talk about solutions for their own communities, and I think that's really important. That said, I have some ideas that probably are not unique to me. One of the things we need to do is really start with our very youngest kids, because we see disparities by the time the kids get to school. And the disparities come about because there's huge economic disparity. And there's disparity in what parents know about. I mean, if your parent has never gone to college, it's going to be really different for you as a child than if you have a parent with a PhD. So we need to offer parents resources very early on. And we do this in the state with some things like, even for like newborns, we have a home visiting program which has shown tremendous results, but we need to do a lot more of that because babies, as they say, babies don't come with manuals. And we need to make sure that every child that's born in this state, that we think of that child as a tremendous gift to our future and that we wrap our resources around them. No matter where their parent is from, no matter what language they speak, no matter where they live in the state, no matter what color they are, and really try to enrich their life and help their parents and offer them support to be the best parent they can be. We need to continue to emphasize early childhood education, which is something that Mark Dayton's done a good job on. We need to continue on that so that every child gets the best possible opportunity. And I mean, I could go on for a long time on this, but we need to do better in our schools. There are things, we know there's a disparities in how kids are disciplined, which are really concerning. And we have to, for one thing, I think we have to really acknowledge that racism is real, and that it's not that there are the good people and the bad people. I think that probably most of us have some element of racism in us, and that we have to start to really confront that and think about how we treat people and make sure that our school children are all expected to have high standards, and that we treat them, with dignity, and that we don't, punish one group more than another group, and all of that kind of stuff. And then finally, I do have a plan for free college tuition for at least the first 2 years for public colleges and technical schools. And I think that would go a long way too, because a lot of our students now, college is very expensive. In fact, our community colleges are about the most expensive community colleges in the whole country. And it's pretty impossible for a lot of students to get the education they need because they simply can't afford it. Or they take out mountains of debt to go to school, and then they are hit with that on the back end. So I think this would be one of the best things Minnesota could do for all of our students, and it would help close the gap because it would make your wealth a lot less important to whether you're able to go to college. And I don't think that's a radical notion at all, because in this country there used to be colleges that were free, and that really started a lot of people on the path toward being solidly in the middle class. My own parents went to Brooklyn College years ago, and it was free, and they were both from poor families. And then we had the GI Bill, which lifted many families out of poverty because people could finally get education. So this is something that I think would be great for Minnesota, and it would help to close those racial gaps as well.
Okay, Cindy Olson asks, what will you do to protect our state's natural resources?
Right. Thank you, Cindy, for that question. I think this is a really critical. Mark Dayton's done a pretty good job of getting started on cleaning up our water. And as you know, people voted some years ago for the Legacy Amendment. A large part of that was to put money into cleaning up our water. So I think this is something Minnesotans care about tremendously all over the state. And, we've had some backsliding on this lately with some of the things that Mark Dayton has unfortunately signed into law that came from the Republican House and Senate. I think we need to strengthen our environmental laws. Think we need to stand up to polluters. And besides that, I think that we need to do more, even to ask ordinary citizens to do more. So, for example, we can't complain about farmers dumping chemicals in their fields when we're dumping chemicals on our lawns, because it's all polluting our water, just as an example. So we need to do more, to hold companies accountable that are spraying chemicals on lawns and things like that. But also we have to be asking citizens to do more to protect our natural resources. We certainly have to move forward as quickly as we can to combat climate change. This is now an emergency. And even though Minnesota is not the biggest piece of the problem, we have to do whatever we can as quickly as we can to convert to a clean energy economy, to stop using, fuels that are creating carbon in our atmosphere, and just move forward as absolutely fast as we can. And of course, the thing about moving to a clean energy economy is that it also actually creates jobs, and good jobs. We have a lot we can do. We don't have to build polluting power plants and polluting copper nickel mines in order to create jobs, because there's a lot of things in this state that need building, fixing our water systems, our pipes so that we don't end up like Flint, Michigan, and all kinds of things like that, where there are jobs that we can do that are also protecting and improving our environment. Very, very important. And I have a strong environmental voting record.
Okay, last part of that question. Let's see. Can you scroll that? Technical difficulties. One moment. Okay. Okay, Ellie Kretz asks the following. I love the idea of free college tuition, but how would you plan to pay for it? And if you would tax the 1% or corporations, how would you ensure they wouldn't leave the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is what we often hear from Republicans. We heard this when Mark Dayton raised the tax just a small amount on the wealthiest Minnesotans, and the outcry was they're going to leave. Well, they didn't leave, and our state actually improved tremendously, and our economy has been very strong as a result of that decision. Yeah, of course there's a point that you can't go beyond, that there is a point certainly that if we go beyond it, that people will start thinking about leaving. But we have a lot to offer in this state. Corporations who have headquarters here, and a lot of the businesses we have here, when they get polled on things, they say, we're here. They're not here because our taxes are low. They're here because we have a well-educated workforce. They're here because we have a really good quality of life. They're here because we have a pretty good transportation system. It's, not keeping up with what it should be. But those are the kind of things that make people want to come here and live here. So I do think there is room for more tax fairness. Now, the Republicans just cut taxes for very wealthy people, actually many of whom are out of state. So I think we need to look at our tax code. I think we need to look at what loopholes we can close so that we have more tax fairness. But actually, providing 2 years of free college tuition is not that expensive in the scheme of things. So I really think it's doable. I'd actually like to see us do 4 years. I'd like to see people be able to go to graduate school without taking on debt. But starting with 2 years is, I think, a very reasonable and a really achievable step. Actually, I think it would so improve Minnesota's economy that people would move here. They would come here to be able to take advantage of this, and businesses would want to be here because we'd have more educated people, and there is a workforce shortage. So the more educated people we have here, the more people ready to fill those jobs, the more those big companies are going to want to come to and stay in Minnesota.
Jordan Orzoff asks, what programs of Mark Dayton's would you keep, and what would you do differently?
That is a great question, Jordan. What programs of Mark Dayton's would I keep, and what would I do differently? It isn't that I so much differ from him on programs. He's had a very good emphasis on education that I think's been great. Remember when Democrats were in charge in the House and Senate, and with Governor Mark Dayton, we did raise taxes for the wealthiest Minnesotans. We used it to pay off the debt to the schools that the Republicans had run up. And, that's very good. I think where I would more differ with Mark Dayton is some of the things he's sort of given in and signed that I never would have signed. Some of the things he's allowed to happen, not so much his own programs and the things he's tried to push forward. So the tax bill that he signed, I would have vetoed that tax bill in a heartbeat. It was a very bad bill. Now, it had some good things in it, and I think he felt conflicted about that. But it also was a bill that our state could not afford, and most of the benefit of that bill went to very wealthy people. He signed a Health and Human Services bill that put us on a very bad trajectory for the future because it made cuts, but it also backfilled the cuts with sort of one-time money, which is going to run out. So we're on a pretty bad trajectory there as well. Let's see, what else? The talking about health care, he signed what the Republicans call a reinsurance bill. I call it a subsidy for insurance companies. I would never have signed that bill. We could have done, if we were going to take state money and put it in to help people who are struggling with high insurance costs, which I think was a legitimate thing to do, there were much better ways to do that than handing $1 billion of state money over to the insurance companies. So that wasn't his plan, that wasn't his program, but he did sign it. And so there are some things that I would stand up against that Mark Dayton has kind of given in and allowed to happen.
Okay, Emily Christie asks, how do we make sure that everyone has a seat at the table so we can stop this political fighting?
Yeah, people often, kind of just wish the world was different, wish that we could turn off the TV and kind of know that the world was being taken care of the way it should be and that people didn't have to be fighting all the time. And I know that sometimes now we all feel this kind of fatigue over the amount of input that we have to give. And I know that most people have a job and a family and other kind of concerns and don't want to have to be constantly writing to their elected officials and don't want to have to be protesting, but are doing it because they feel like they've got to. And that's, in fact, that's why I'm running for governor, because I feel like I have to. I can't just assume that everything is going to go the right way if I'm not there putting my voice forward for ordinary folks. So how can we make sure everyone has a seat so we can stop this political fighting? Well, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question. I think that the reason we have so much political fighting, if you will, is not because people can't get along with each other. It's because there are real opposing forces going on right now. There really is a war, a kind of a class war going on right now, to tell you the truth. I know that's kind of a term that people don't like to use. But, if you look at what's going on right now in Congress, it's the clearest example. The Republicans are putting through a tax bill that would add $1.5 trillion to the deficit, where the vast majority of the benefits of that bill go to the super wealthiest corporations and individuals who do not need a tax cut. They have money to burn. This will not help the economy. And why are they doing it? They're doing it because they're donors. These same wealthy people are demanding it of them. So how do you sit down and reason with that? It's not about reasoning. It's not about getting along. It's about power. It's about understanding that there are forces that want it all. And it appears to me now that they will stop at nothing. It's how much do they need? How many millions and billions of dollars does Walmart need? Or Amazon, or the CEOs of these companies? Just how much do they need? How much does Donald Trump need? And everybody else is left with less and less and working hard and struggling to get ahead. So when this is the dynamic, it's not like we choose to be fighting, but the fight is brought to us. Otherwise, ordinary folks are going to fall further and further behind. So, we'd all like to stop fighting, but the reality is at this moment, it's not enough to say, and some candidates are saying, oh, I'll bring people together. I can bring urban and rural. I can bring the corporations and the workers together. I think they don't live in this world that we're in right now. The world that I'm seeing is one where we better start fighting for ordinary folks, because the stuff that we've depended on, the idea that you could get a job and support your family and have security, that's gone. And, we better start fighting to make sure that ordinary folks don't lose it all.
Okay, Mary Kirschling asks, how can Minnesota's increase access for mental health beds and increase the number of mental health providers?
That's a great question, Mary. Thank you. And so mental health, our mental health system, quote unquote, has really been a topic of discussion for quite some time. A lot of people would say we don't even have a system. It's that bad. There has been some work, and I have to say this is something where I think Republicans and Democrats agree a lot of the time that we need to do better. Sometimes where we don't agree is that Democrats understand that we have to pay for it, and Republicans don't want to pay. They want the same things, but sometimes they just don't want to pay for it. So, but there is a lot of agreement around mental health. One of the big problems that we're seeing now is that in our public programs, the HMOs who we hire to administer our public programs are actually cutting the fees they pay to mental health providers who are already underpaid. And when you don't pay people to deliver a service, they're going to have to deliver less of it or get out of the business altogether. So I think we're really sort of at a crisis point. For a number of years, I've been trying to get the legislature to get the HMOs, the insurance companies, out of our public programs. And this is there are so many reasons why we should get them out. They waste a lot of our money. We can't manage our system with them between the state and our patients. And the debacle in mental health, I think, is one of the symptoms of that problem, because a lot of our mental health care is paid for through our public programs. So I would say that one of the big things we have to do is get the HMOs out. We don't need them anymore. The state can contract directly with providers of services and do a much better job of making sure that we have resources where we need them, and that people are appropriately paid so that they can deliver the service that Minnesotans need.
Okay, Laura Ash asks, what will Tina do to help ensure immigrants and refugees are welcome in Minnesota, despite what's currently happening at the federal level? Yeah,
thank you, Laura. So the question about what can we do to welcome immigrants and refugees in Minnesota? I mean, times are certainly tough. I'm just, the horror stories are just tremendous. And even here in Minnesota, where we think of ourselves as being a more welcoming state, and I think we are. But, there are some things, maybe this goes back to the question about Mark Dayton. I think Mark Dayton had the ability to allow people to get a driver's license even if they're undocumented. That was a policy that Governor Pawlenty instituted on his own, and I did some research on it. I actually believe that that's something that we could have fixed. That would be one example, because we've just put a barrier in front of people that serves no real purpose other than to make them feel unwelcome and be more afraid than they already are. Immigrants and refugees have, over our entire history, they have injected energy and new ideas into our state, into our entire country, and I think they will continue to do so. Actually, the projections are that if we don't have immigrants and refugees, we're not going to have a workforce. Because again, people are aging, and if we want to replace our workforce, we need to bring in immigrants and refugees. So I think that we need to continue with policies that say that we're not going to turn people over for deportation, unless we're forced to do that. If we don't have to, we should use our police resources to solve crimes at the local level, not to act as an extra arm of the federal immigration enforcement people. I think that we should continue and expand our programs to help people get into the workforce, to help them develop skills, to help them develop language skills. We need to continue with programs that help Minnesotans get to know each other. Because a lot of the distrust is because they're afraid of what they don't know. And, I think we've got wonderful immigrant communities in Minnesota that are bringing a lot of vitality to our state. So I think we need to continue with programs that work to help people become integrated just as quickly as possible.
Okay, last question. Sarah Gandalf asks, how would you balance corporate accountability while promoting business growth in Minnesota?
Well, thanks, Sarah. I don't think those two things are incompatible. Things have gotten really out of whack in our entire country, where it seems like the corporations have so much power. We have this campaign finance problem, Citizens United, that's allowed a lot of flow of money from the super wealthy who, people say we have the best Congress money can buy. And it really does seem that way more and more. So, I think that we have to make our state government just as strong as we can. We have a system here where actually people can give contributions, individuals can get contributions and get them refunded by the state. I hope everybody knows this, up to $50 in a calendar year for an individual that you can give to state-based campaigns that sign a public subsidy agreement. So this is a system that still allows ordinary folks to have impact on campaigns. When we elect people who are not beholden to those corporations, they're going to be a lot more willing and able to stand up and demand corporate accountability. Minnesota's been pretty good on this. I think we have to be even better as the corporations get stronger and stronger. But letting corporations run away with the store is not the same as promoting business growth. I think we have to focus more on small businesses. I think we have to actually demand that wages are raised. I think we should be at least at $15 an hour minimum wage, not in 5 years, but now, because people can't live on what they're getting now. When you do that, it boosts the whole economy. When consumers have money in their pockets, when people are able to buy that pair of shoes or that car or buy a home, that boosts the economy. And those corporations also are making money. People are making money when people have money in their pockets to spend. So I don't think that it's one or the other. I think we can have more corporate accountability and make sure that people are first. People, the ordinary people of Minnesota absolutely have to be first. Their interests are really what has to matter.
Thank you. Okay, our time is just about up. I want to thank Tina for joining Stand Up Minnesota for this town hall, and thank you for all the live streams for your questions. Our next town hall will be Tuesday, December 19th. And that'll be with Paul Thiessen.
Okay, so we have a minute or two to just close up and just say a few words. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you, Steve, for trying to read the questions on the faraway screen there. And so I'm running because ordinary people have to be at the very center of everything we do in this state. So, you know, over about the last 40 years, or a recent 40-year period, the productivity of Americans went up 72%. The average wage of Americans went up only 9%. And corporate CEOs' compensation went up about 950%. So is it any wonder that people feel like they can't get ahead? This is something that we have to address. And we didn't talk much about wages. I didn't get a question about wages, but there's a recent report, actually it comes out every year, and it's called the Minnesota Cost of Living Report. And it shows what it costs to have just a basic needs budget in different regions of the state in the average for the entire state. And in many parts of the state, $15 an hour right now today does not get you to a basic needs budget. So we are in a serious problem where many, many people are just scraping by or not even scraping by, and this is affecting everyone. So we need to focus on that. We need to raise the wage. If small businesses struggle with paying a higher wage, then we should focus on helping the small businesses pay that wage, not making the worker work for less than they need to just have a basic needs budget, because work should pay. Our economy isn't, we don't have scarcity. The problem that it feels like scarcity is because the 1% is taking so much of what is produced in this country. We need to fight back against that. I'm a person who can't be bullied or intimidated. I stand up for people. I fight. And this is, like I said before in answer to a question, this is not the time to talk about, you know, I'm such a nice person, I can bring everybody together. That's not what it's about. We have a real difference of power going on in this country. Ordinary people in Minnesota have to come together to take back their power, to make this a state that once again works for them. I believe that Minnesota can do that. I'm Tina Liebling. I want to be your next governor. And please go to my website, tinaliebling.com. You can learn more about me. And thank you again for joining us this evening.